Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Today we are going to solve by factoring. You have been factoring for a while, so now we're going to go ahead and add an extra step on solving. If you still have your notebook, please take it out and go ahead and continue on that. But if you don't, just go ahead and grab a piece of paper and follow through. I do ask that whatever I write, you write, because if you just look at it, that's not really going to stay or stick. And you will be doing this over and over and over again next year and the following year after. So I do suggest that you follow through with me, okay? Something to remember, I just like to have my little side note. Remember to smile. I can't see you, you can't see me, but just smile. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to work on a warm-up, and we're going to find the factors. Again, you've been doing this, or you did this last week and the week prior to that, but let's just go ahead and review. Okay, so if you want to stop the video and then go ahead and factor it out, and then when you go back to the video, then you'll be able to see my work and then check. Okay? Okay, so I went ahead and did the factoring, and I went ahead and put the box so you can check your work. And remember that we are trying to find two numbers that when you multiply you get a -24, and when you add you get a 5. So my linear factors, my two factors, are x minus 3 and x plus 8. Well, these factors that you have practiced so much to do are now going to help us find like the x-intercepts, also known as zeros, also known as roots. Okay, so here we go. Here is the warm-up that we did. So now what we're going to do is we are going to solve quadratics by factoring. So what that means is you have to set your equation equal to 0. And why 0? Because if you really think about it, if you're trying to find x-intercepts and zeros, you're trying to see where they're crossing the x-axis. And if they're crossing the x-axis, that means that it's going to be a number and your y value is going to be 0. So by us equaling it to 0, you're telling me that y is equal to 0. You want to know where the x is at. So that's why it has to be equal to 0. Okay? With that said, so now that we went ahead and factored our warm-up, we have x plus 8 and x minus 3. And if we set that equal to 0, in order for us to find our zeros, you pretty much grab each parentheses, so x plus 8, and you equal that to 0, and then x minus 3, and you equal that to 0. And then when you solve for x, well, of course, we have to subtract 8 on this side. So x is equal to -8. And if we add 3 on this side, because remember it's opposite, then x is equal to 3. So your two zeros are -8 and 3. Okay, if you want to write them as a point, then it would be -8, 0, and 3, 0. And again, what do these 2 points represent? These 2 points represent that if you were to graph your quadratic, you are going to be touching the x-axis at -8 and at +3. So you're going to have your quadratic function looking like that, touching at -8 and crossing or touching the x-axis at 3. That's what we mean by the zeros, because they cross or they go through that point on the x-axis. Okay? Here we go. Number 1. So we're going to go ahead and set this equal to 0. So we have x minus 5 is equal to 0, and 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. And then this is, if we solve, we're going to have x is equal to 5, because we're adding 5 on both sides. And we're going to go ahead and add 1 here. So 3x is equal to 1. And now we're going to go ahead and divide by 3. So x is equal to 1/3. So these are your two x-intercepts at 5 and at 1/3. Okay? Number 2, notice that I have a 3 outside. That means that was the greatest common factor. It really doesn't affect the answer, because if I would want to get rid of it, I would divide both sides by 3. Well, this is still x plus 2, and this is x plus 4, and 0 divided by 3 is still 0. So if you break this up and you equal it to 0, this is going to be -2, and this one is going to be -4. So I don't know if you've noticed, but once you set it up in factored form, the signs change because you're moving them. Okay? When I say moving them, you're moving them to the other side of the equal. Okay? Here we go. We're going to find the zeros of the quadratic below. So we're going to take x squared minus 8x minus 20, and we're going to equal this to 0. We first have to factor. So I need two numbers that when you multiply, you get a -20, and when you add, you get a -8. So here is my box. Here's my x squared. Here's my -20. And if I multiply to get a -20 and add to get a -8, 10 and 2. And one of them has to be negative, and it has to be the 10. Why? Because when I add them, I need to end up with a -8. So now we have x on this side, x on this side, x times 2, and x times a -10. So my two factors are x minus 10 and x plus 2 is equal to 0. So then this is going to be x equal to 10, and x is equal to -2. Again, when we solve and equal them to 0, and we're solving for x, then we get the opposite sign. Okay, here we go. So now we look at number 4. We have 2x squared plus 7x is equal to 15. Well, notice that this 15 is on the other side of the equal, but at the beginning I told you that your equation, in order for you to find the zeros, has to be equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I am going to move the 15 over, which means that this is 2x squared plus 7x. And if I move it over, I have to cross the equal sign from now, or so, excuse me, now from a positive 15, it's going to become a -15. And now we'll be equaling it to 0. So behind the scenes, I subtracted 15 on this side, so I have to subtract 15 on that side. Well, that's how I got the 0 on the right of the equal sign, and that's how I ended up with a -15. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, factor this out, and then go ahead and check my work. So these are my two factors, x plus 5 and 2x minus 3. I went ahead and left the work to show you how I got that. Times -3. Okay, so now if we equal this to 0, again, this is x plus 5 is equal to 0, and this is 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. So this x is going to be minus 5, so we get a -5. And this x-intercept, well, we move the 3, and this is 2x is equal to 3. And now we divide both sides by 2. So x is equal to 3/2. Okay. Okay. Here we go. We're going to go to this one. So we have 6x squared minus 30x is equal to 3x. Again, this has to be 0, right? So in order for it to be 0, we have to move this over. So we have 6x squared, and if I jump it over, this is plus 3x minus 30 is equal to 0. And I put it in order, x squared, x, and no x. That way I can factor. But before I factor, remember that we also have to consider our GCF. So if I look at this, they all can be divided by 3. If I take out a 3, if I factor out a 3, then I'm left with 2x squared plus x minus 10 is equal to 0. 3 times 2, we're back at 6. 3 times x, we're back at 3x. And 3 times a -10, we're back at -30. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we are going to factor what's inside the parentheses. So we are going to factor this piece right here. Okay? Go ahead and try it. Factor it out and then check your work with my work. Okay, so here you go. I went ahead and factored everything, and again, it's two numbers that when you multiply, you get a negative 20, and when you add, you get a 1. So my factors are 2x plus 5 and x minus 2, and we're going to equal that to 0, which means we have 2x plus 5 is equal to 0, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. Well, this one, remember that we just have to add 2 to both sides. So this is x is equal to 2. And on this side, we have to move the 5 over. So 2x is equal to negative 5. And then when we divide by 2, x is equal to negative 5 halves. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not going through the process of the box, that's because this right here, we've been doing that for like the past 2 weeks. And you've been watching videos, and you took a quiz and a test over that. So my goal right now on this lesson is to focus on the actual solving on that piece. Okay, so that's why I'm not taking too much on the factoring. If you need help with the factoring, then you need to go back and watch the videos from last week. Okay. Okay, so our two zeros are 2 and negative 5. And sometimes they write them this way. They write them 2 and a negative 5 halves, and then they put them in like this little form. Okay. It doesn't mean it's a point, it's telling you the two solutions. Okay, last one. Here we go. Okay, so we have 5x squared minus 25x is equal to 0. Gold, it's equal to 0. We don't have to worry about that. All we need to do is now factor. Well, I notice that I have two terms. Okay, so I'm trying to think of the box, but I can't really think of the box right now. Well, remember that the first thing you need to do is ask if there's a GCF. Well, yes, they both can be divided by 5 and by x. So I'm going to take out a 5x. And if I take out a 5x, I'm left with x minus 5 is equal to 0. And let's check our work. 5x times x is 5x squared. 5x times a negative 5 is a negative 25x. Okay? So by doing that, now I have my two factors. I don't have to use the box or the area model anymore because it's pretty much done. What do I mean by done? So you have 5x is equal to 0, because you have that one. And then you have x minus 5 is equal to 0. So when I solve, well, if I divide this one by 5, no matter what, it's still 0. And this one, when we move the 5 over by adding, we end up with a 5. Okay? Okay, perfect. So this was solving quadratics by factoring. Again, if you need help with the factoring, then you need to go back and look at the videos from last week and the week before that. And then also look at our notes before we went on spring break, because you have all that too. And if you don't have your notebook with you, then you can go back to Canvas, and the notes on factoring are there as well. Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.